There is a particular fear that haunts the powerful. Not death, not failure, but exposure. To be too visible, too reachable, to be touched by the dirty hands of reality, to be seen by those who do not worship. That is the primal terror that comes with power. So the powerful do what they always have. They build walls, sometimes of stone, sometimes of silence, sometimes of distance dressed as discipline. But every fortress begins the same way, with the first stone. The first stone is not laid out of strength. It is placed by fear. Fear disguised as caution, as cleverness, as control. And the builder tells himself, this is for my safety. This is how I protect what I've built. This is how I stay in power. But walls do not whisper back, and silence, though comforting, is treacherous. It amplifies the voice of paranoia. It kills the voices that warn. Inside the fortress, truth dies first. Dissent dies second. And the mind dies last. Slowly, quietly, behind velvet curtains and golden gates. Power requires touch, contact, friction, presence. To lead, one must be seen. To rule, one must read the room, not just the map. But the man behind the wall forgets the world. And worse, the world forgets him. Qin Shi Huang built a wall so long it could be seen from the heavens. But it did not save his dynasty. Escobar locked himself in a palace of his own design and died alone, barefoot, hunted like prey. Tsars, emperors, kings, eaten alive not by their enemies, but by their distance. Walls kill faster than swords. They just do it quietly. And yet isolation seduces. It offers illusion. You are untouchable. You are above them. You no longer need to listen. But every layer of protection becomes another layer of blindness. And every blind ruler creates the conditions for their own fall. Even the gods in their golden halls eventually lose the loyalty of men. Even Olympus, when silent too long, becomes irrelevant. This is how power rots, not from poison or betrayal, but from disconnection. The more you protect yourself, the less you control. The more you retreat, the more your enemies advance, unseen. And when they come, they will not knock. They will already be inside, because you were never watching. And now, let us walk the first corridor of this fortress of mirrors, to witness how one of history's greatest rulers built the longest wall ever seen, and still could not escape his fear. He was called the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China through steel, fear, and vision. He conquered warring states, centralized language, currency, and power. He believed in immortality, in permanence, and above all, he believed in control. But behind the eyes of this legendary ruler was a mind haunted by shadows. Even after defeating every rival kingdom, he was gripped by the thought, what if someone comes to undo it all? What if ghosts returned? What if chaos once again crept in through the cracks? And so, the solution seemed obvious. He would seal the empire shut. The Great Wall of China was not a single wall at first. It was dozens of smaller barriers from fractured kingdoms. Qin ordered them torn down and reborn into one unbroken spine of stone and blood. Over 300,000 workers were conscripted, soldiers, peasants, prisoners, driven like cattle into the mountains. They hauled stone, brick, timber, and died in the process by the tens of thousands. They say the dead were buried inside the wall, that the mortar is part bone, that the foundation hums with the voices of the forgotten. But Qin did not stop there. He sent ships to search for elixirs of life. He avoided public appearances, fearing assassins. He built secret roads and traps, invisible tombs, mechanical guardians. He was obsessed with safety, and in doing so, he left the world behind. His court became a stage of fear. No one dared speak freely. No one dared contradict him. Ministers became ornaments, guards became jailers, and the emperor became a prisoner in his own perfection. Power, when disconnected from reality, begins to hallucinate. He trusted only his own voice, and eventually, he trusted no one. At the end of his life, Qin built a tomb, a vast underground city, complete with rivers of mercury, constellations on the ceiling, and 8,000 terracotta soldiers to guard him. He was buried with everything except peace, because isolation cannot buy safety. It only delays collapse. After his death, his empire crumbled within years. His son was overthrown. The dynasty ended in flames, and the Great Wall, though it still stands, could not protect the empire it was built to save. The illusion of safety had cost him the substance of control. Walls had kept enemies out, but they had also kept wisdom out, kept truth out, kept life out. Let us now descend deeper into the fortress, to meet another man who tried to hide behind walls of wealth and terror, only to discover that isolation breeds not safety, but betrayal. Chamber 2, The Madness of Isolation. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar was a man who built an empire out of dust. White dust, cocaine. By the 1980s, he was the most powerful drug lord on Earth. He controlled over 80% of the global cocaine trade. He bought politicians, armies, towns. He killed judges, journalists, presidential candidates. He gave food to the poor, built churches, paid off school fees. To many, he was a Robin Hood. To others, a demon in designer shoes. But one thing is certain, he ruled through chaos. And as the world tried to bring him down, he did something no king, no criminal had done before. He built his own prison. In 1991, under pressure from the Colombian government and the US, Escobar agreed to surrender on one condition. He would build and live in his own prison. It was called La Catedral, but it was no prison. It had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, a disco. It had sweeping views of the valley he once ruled. It had no guards, except the ones he chose himself. To the world, it was a victory. To Escobar, it was insulation. Here, he could control his empire without threat. No wiretaps, no raids, no extradition. Only loyalists, only comfort. But isolation is a clever poison. It dulls the blade of power. It replaces fear with fantasy. From within La Catedral, Escobar's grip began to loosen. He grew paranoid. He tortured and killed his own men. He suspected betrayal in every whisper. And worse, the very government that had allowed this absurd arrangement began to fear what he might do next. 1 year later, he killed 2 of his closest lieutenants inside the prison. That was the turning point. The government sent troops to relocate him. But by the time they arrived, Escobar was gone, vanished into the jungle. The king had fled his own fortress. And now, the hunt began. He had gone from emperor to ghost. No more parties, no more soccer games, no more peace, just silence, footsteps, and the sound of his own breathing in the dark. In December 1993, they found him, hiding in Medellin, trapped in a modest house, trying to make a phone call. He ran to the roof, shoes untied, hair disheveled, no guards, no gold, no power. He died there, barefoot and bleeding, surrounded not by enemies, but by echoes. Escobar tried to control the world by cutting it off, but in doing so, he lost what made him powerful: Fear, movement, presence, chaos. La Catedral did not save him. It softened him. It blinded him. It disconnected him from the pulse of the street and turned a king into a fugitive. We have now seen isolation as a tomb and a trap. But what happens when a ruler does the opposite? When she refuses to retreat and instead steps into the fire, unseen and untouchable. Chamber 3. The Power of Presence. Catherine de Medici. She was not born to rule. Catherine de Medici was an Italian girl orphaned young, married off into the French royal line, mocked for her appearance, ignored by her husband, dismissed by the court, and yet, through war, assassination, and plague, she outlasted kings, outmaneuvered enemies, and held power for 3 successive reigns, not by building walls, but by entering rooms no one expected her to survive. France at the time was a kingdom split by chaos, torn between Catholics and Huguenots, nobles and radicals, bloodlines and vendettas. Any attempt to rule directly was suicide. So Catherine didn't rule directly. She observed, she listened, she made herself present in every chamber, every corner, every corridor of influence. She positioned herself as a widow, a mother, a mediator. But behind that mask was a strategist of uncanny brilliance. She did not retreat into solitude. She expanded into silence. She built a vast network of informants, ambassadors, ladies-in-waiting, and spies disguised as servants. She knew who slept with whom, who owed what to whom, what scandal was about to erupt. She didn't need force. She had foresight and presence. Quiet, watchful presence was her shield. She moved between sides like water. One moment she was with the Huguenots, the next, the Catholics, not out of treachery, but out of design. To stay above the flood, she became the bridge. Catherine once said, "One must take action the moment one knows the will of the king, or one loses everything." She understood, power belongs not to those who hide, but to those who appear when it matters most. But her presence was not just physical, it was psychological. Catherine was infamous for her intelligence networks, her mystique, and her use of symbolism. She hosted elaborate festivals, theatrical displays, court spectacles, not just for entertainment, but for manipulation. A smiling court was easier to control than a rebellious one. A distracted noble was easier to steer than an angry one. A stage was a better fortress than a castle wall. Her enemies were many, but none could predict her, and few could touch her. Even when the infamous St. Bartholomew's Day massacre stained her legacy in blood, Catherine emerged intact, powerful, enigmatic, standing amid the wreckage like a ghost that had orchestrated the storm. She understood the central truth of Law 18. To protect your power, you must be near it. To influence events, you must feel the tremors. And to survive chaos, you must wade into it, not wall it off. Catherine de Medici did not build a fortress. She became the shadow that walked through all of them. Now we have walked both paths, the exile and the infiltrator. But in our age, isolation wears new masks. It is digital, emotional, psychological. Let us now enter the final chamber, where the fortress is not built of stone, but of silence. Chamber 4, the silent siege, the modern fortress. In our time, the fortress has changed form. It no longer looks like a castle or a compound or a walled tomb. It looks like self-protection, like digital privacy, like boundaries, like ghosting, like retreat disguised as righteousness. We believe we're becoming smarter, sharper, more evolved. But in truth, we're becoming more separate. And in separation, power, influence, connection all begin to decay. The modern world tempts us constantly to isolate. The CEO, who surrounds herself with loyal executives and ignores feedback from the ground floor. The activist who blocks every dissenting voice until only echoes remain. The man who disappears after a heartbreak and never opens his heart again. Not because he's strong, but because he's afraid to feel weak. The influencer who deletes every critical comment, then wonders why engagement dies. These are not kings behind walls of stone. They are ordinary people behind invisible glass. Surrounded by silence, they built themselves. And the cost? They can't see the betrayal brewing. They can't hear the shift in tone. They don't feel the world changing until it's too late. Visual, a social media feed filled with adoration. Scroll, scroll, no challenge, no honesty, no growth. The algorithm rewards comfort. The culture rewards detachment. And we call this peace. But it is the same illusion that claimed Qin Shi Huang. The same illusion that buried Escobar. The same illusion Catherine de Medici knew to avoid. Walls make you weak. Not because they fall, but because they make you forget how to fight without them. You cannot sense the tides of power if you have removed yourself from the shoreline. There is a loneliness growing in the modern world, not because people are alone, but because they have trained themselves to be unreachable. They ghost, they exit, they mute, they disappear, hoping the problem will vanish with their presence. But problems do not die in silence. They fester, and when they return, they are always louder. The silent siege is not an event. It's a state of being. It is the slow, creeping erosion of insight, intuition, and strength, caused not by attack, but by absence. When you wall off the world, you lose the language of power. You stop hearing its rhythms, and one day when power slips from your hands, you won't even understand why. You are alone, and you built it that way. Now we stand in the center of the fortress, and at last, the mirrors begin to break. Let us reflect on what we've seen, and what must be done to avoid this silent death. Final chamber. The mirror cracks. You have now seen what happens when power chooses protection over presence. When the hand once outstretched to command recoils into a fist behind walls. Qin Shi Huang built the longest wall the world had ever seen, and still, fear found its way inside. He vanished into legend, but his empire collapsed within a heartbeat. Pablo Escobar built his own prison, designed every wall, every hallway, every gate. He believed it made him invincible, but isolation turned him into prey, and he died alone on a rooftop, hunted by silence. Catherine de Medici built no fortress. She moved among the people. She watched, listened, learned. She survived 3 kings, dozens of enemies, and ruled not through retreat, but through presence. She understood. Power fades when you hide from it. And now in the modern world, we build fortresses with apps, with opinions, with fear of disagreement. We disappear behind curated identities, echo chambers, walls of validation, and we call this safety. We call this peace. But peace without risk is not peace. It is paralysis. The truth of Law 18 is this: the fortress does not keep your enemies out. It keeps your evolution in. Isolation is tempting, but influence requires movement. It requires touch. It requires courage. You must feel the ground shift beneath your feet, smell the fire before it reaches your gates, hear the tremors of rebellion before the knife is at your throat. Power is not something you hide. It is something you wield, and wielding requires risk. So ask yourself, where have you built walls? Where have you mistaken silence for strength? Who have you cut off, not because they were dangerous, but because they were honest? What dangers are growing just beyond your line of sight because you refuse to look? Break the mirror. Step out of the fortress. Re-enter the arena. There is no safety in stillness, only decay. And the moment you vanish, so does your power. Like, subscribe, comment, or don't. You are the master of your own life.